In Florence, Italy, there is a very special museum dedicated to the founder and the history of the luxury design house Salvatore Ferragamo. Since the 1920s, this luxury Italian brand created artistic, fashionable, and skillfully made footwear for iconic stars like Sophia Loren, Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, and Marilyn Monroe. The museum features shoes, archival pieces, and wooden lasts of some of Ferragamo's most popular clients. This includes the Indian queen Maharani Indira Devi of Cooch-Behar, one of Ferragamo's most beloved clients. Maharani Indira Devi had a passion for shoes. She splurged on over 100 pairs of custom-made shoes from Ferragamo at a time. There are records of her sending him bags of precious jewels to adorn her footwear with. At the museum, there is a display featuring her photograph and this particular sandal. In 1938, Ferragamo designed this sandal for Maharani Indira Devi. It is a fascinating piece of footwear, melding both European and Indian sensibilities to create something quite unique, very much like Indira Devi herself. Born into a very progressive Indian royal family, she was unusually well educated for a woman of her time, Indian or British, born in the late Victorian period. In 1911, she caused an international scandal when she broke off her engagement to a much older and less cute Maharaja in order to marry a very cute, young prince that she had fallen in love with. This was an act of defiance that was practically unheard of in Indian royal circles in the early 20th century. Sadly, her husband died young, and after the death of her husband, she ruled as a competent regent on behalf of her minor son for many years. In the 1920s, her American friend Evelyn Walsh described seeing her gambling at a casino in Le Touquet in France. The most fabulously beautiful young Indian lady, holding the longest cigarette holder I had ever seen, wearing a brilliant sari and covered with pearls, emeralds, and rubies. She was quite poker-faced, but had a pile of casino chips in front of her to testify to her success, and to top it all, she had a live turtle whose back was laden with 3 strips of emeralds, diamonds, and rubies, and which she used as a talisman. Every now and then the creature would crawl away across the table, but every time she caught it back, the crowd was totally mesmerized by her. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, her extravagant lifestyle made her a popular subject for the London press. She was also quite adventurous. In 1929, she boarded a seaplane with friends, but it crashed. No one died, but her friend wrote, "The Maharani, soaking wet, sat beside me, puffing at a cigarette and smiling to herself at the thrills which life provided." For an Indian queen in the 1920s and the 1930s, she was a real rebel. There are stories of her dancing on tables at masquerade balls in Paris, having lost a Rolls Royce to someone in a bet, and going to bed with very attractive men. She was protected by her wealth, her rank, intelligence, and her beauty, but also by her confidence. Today, I want to discuss the fascinating life of Maharani Indira Devi of Cooch-Behar. I feel like she's not as well known as her daughter Maharani Gayatri Devi of Jaipur, but her life to me was even more interesting. She is my favorite royal to read about. I find her so fascinating. Before I continue, hello everyone, I'm Tass, and I discuss fashion, films, and culture from the Indian subcontinent on my YouTube channel. And today, we are going to do a deep dive into the life and times of Maharani Indira Devi of Cooch-Behar. This video is actually episode 2 of my new series on my channel titled Maharaja Swag and Maharani Style, Stories of Royals from the Indian Subcontinent. I first became aware of Maharani Indira Devi many years ago when I read a random article about her in Vogue India, and I actually have the issue here. Priyanka Chopra was on the cover, and this is the December 2011 Vogue India. The article was written by an Australian writer named Julia Booth. She was in India for a holiday. She was in Kolkata specifically, and she went into an antique store and found this absolutely gorgeous photograph in the middle of a dusty pile of photographs. The figure in the photograph was this very stylish woman. She had a pearl necklace, diamond earrings, and she's in a fur coat. But the photograph was damaged. She could not read the writing on the back of the photograph. When she asked the antique store owner if he knew the person in the photograph, he kind of said, I think it's Gayatri Devi. So the writer had to do some research and some digging. She had the picture restored. She sent the photograph to an expert and confirmed that the woman in the photograph was actually Maharani Indira Devi of Cooch-behar. After restoration, there was some writing on the back of the photograph that read Hanover Square, London. And this actually confirmed that the photograph was taken at the famous studio located at Vogue House in London, where celebrities and royalty of the 1920s and the 1930s came to have their official portraits taken. This article is exactly what I mean when I say that Maharani Indira Devi is often overlooked in history, relegated to an unknown dusty photograph in an antique store, or mistaken for her daughter Maharani Gayatri Devi. That is why I'm so excited to do this video. There's so much to discuss about her life, really, and she deserves it. She's truly a fascinating woman. Maharani Indira Devi was born royal into immense privilege. She was born in 1892 as the Princess Indira Raje of Baroda. Her parents were the Gaikwar of Baroda, Maharaja Sayajirar Gaikwar III, and Maharani Chimnabai. Indira was the only daughter and grew up alongside her brothers in the glittering halls of the Lakshmi Vilas Palace. Her father held a princely title that was considered to be one of the most prestigious, according to the ranking set in British-administered India. Both her parents were very progressive and championed for women's education. As a result, Indira was one of the first princesses to receive a Western education and to attend both school and college. She attended a finishing school on the south coast of England. She spoke English, Bengali, French, and Marathi. As a child, she also traveled extensively with her parents. One of the earliest stories I know about her, meaning Indira Devi, tells how she and her four brothers, all quite small and dressed identically in white pajama trousers and brocade jackets with gold embroidered caps, were taken to Buckingham Palace to be presented to Queen Victoria. As they stood before her, the elderly Queen Victoria asked which one was the little girl. 5 pairs of dark brown eyes stared back at her, and then, because they enjoyed fooling grown-ups, one of the boys stepped forward. But they underestimated Queen Victoria, who, sensing that something was wrong, walked around to the back of the row of solemn children, and there a long black pigtail betrayed Indira. By the time she was in her late teens, Indira was known for her beauty, wit, and elegance, so of course she had many suitors. However, in royal circles of that time, marriages were not affairs of the heart, but affairs of the state, arranged on behalf of both the bride and groom by their parents and government. In 1909, the Maharaja of Gwalior went to London for the season, and there he met 17-year-old Indira, who was already making waves with Edwardian society. When he returned, he started negotiations with Indira's father regarding a marriage to her. In 1910, when Indira was 18 years old, she was informed that she was engaged to marry Madhu Rao Scindia, the Maharaja of Gwalior. He was very rich, and the alliance was set to bring together two very powerful Maratha kingdoms in pre-independent India. Considering that Indira was a very vibrant, beautiful, and educated young woman with ideals of personal freedom and choice, the personal drawbacks for her in this entire arrangement was obvious. Firstly, Indira would be the second wife of the Maharaja of Gwalior. He already had a wife, but no heir. Secondly, the extensive negotiations that took place between her father and the Maharaja of Gwalior highlighted the reality that Indira would have to accept. Her primary duty would be to produce an heir. The Maharaja would not neglect his first wife, he made that clear, who he was also bound to as a husband and whose family had paid him a very large dowry. He also had a mistress. Fidelity of the Maharaja was not part of this marriage contract. During the negotiations for the marriage, Scindia sent his aide-de-camp to discuss with Indira's family the day-to-day regime under which she would be living as his wife, when she would be known as Second Her Highness. They would ride together at dawn on Mondays, Indira was informed, and he would spend the night with her on Thursdays. The other evenings were reserved for his first wife and mistress. Thirdly, he was much older than Indira, and she was 18 and he was in his 30s when their engagement was announced. Finally, she would be required to be in parda after marriage, a consequence for women in very conservative Indian royal households where they are essentially segregated from men other than their husband. This would mean that Indira would not even be able to see her brothers. Also, this segregation extended to clothing that these women wore, usually requiring women to wear veils. The only man that she would see was her husband, and then only when he chose to see her. A lot of us would think, oh, well, she was educated and intelligent. Why would she agree to this? I think the answer lies in the fact that she viewed this marriage as a part of her duty, a duty that was reiterated to her by her parents. During the negotiations, she actually did try to establish her own terms for her future. In a report by an observer to the negotiations, Indira's initial submitted response to the Maharaja was that she would not keep parda. She insisted on being in Europe for 6 months of the year. She wanted the key to the treasury, plus a written guarantee that any son that she would have would succeed to the throne. In 1911, a year after her engagement was announced and confirmed, Indira attended the coronation darbar of George V in Delhi with her family. The British compelled every important head of a princely state to attend this spectacle. Each royal household had their own very big campsite. The spectacle lasted several weeks, and there were garden parties, polo matches, formalities, and forms of entertainment. It was during this time that Indira met up with her school friends from her boarding school in England, Princess Pativa and Sudhira of Cooch-Behar. At their campsite, Indira met their brother, 25-year-old Prince Jitendra, for the first time. He was nicknamed Jit, and I'm going to call him Jit in this video. At this point, Indira's life took a very dramatic turn. As they danced together, Jit asked Indira why she looked so sad. She was about to be married, he said. She should be over the moon. I'm miserable because I'm getting married, she replied. Well, why don't you marry me? Came Jit's response. What started as a throwaway comment developed quickly into a whirlwind romance that would scandalize the community. At the darbar, Indira and Jit took advantage of their nearness to steal away for hours together, defying her parents' wishes and convention. By the time this coronation darbar was over, Indira was completely sure that she would marry Prince Jitendra. 18-year-old Indira then made an extraordinary move by doing something totally unprecedented. She broke off her engagement herself without her parents' permission or anybody knowing about it. She wrote a letter to her fiancé, the Maharaja of Gwalior, saying that she did not want to marry him. To understand the stakes, at this point her wedding date was set for the 25th of January 1912. She was basically weeks away from getting married. The alliance had been planned for years. The wedding preparation was well underway. Opulent invitations were sent out. Both states were getting ready for this public fanfare of the alliance. Astrologers were consulted. Auspicious dates were discussed. Her mother, Maharani Chimnabai, was already in the process of buying her wedding jewelry and trousseau. She had already bought Indira's linens, which were embroidered with the initials that Indira would adopt after her marriage. In response, Indira's father received a telegram from the Maharaja of Gwalior with a single sentence. What does the princess mean by her letter? Indira's parents were angry. Her letter had ended any prospect of this marriage taking place. The engagement itself was at the time considered almost as binding as the marriage ceremony. Indira's personal decision to end this engagement was driven not just by love, but by a clear and profound sense of personal agency. It was a very bold and rare move for women of her time to make. Her decision had a detrimental effect on her relationship with her parents, but more especially her mother, Maharani Chimnabai, who saw her daughter's actions as having disgraced and embarrassed the family. Indira's daughter wrote about this in her memoir. My mother told me that even before she met and fell in love with my father, she was unhappy about the marriage to Gwalior. Maharaja was a charming man, but he was over 20 years her senior and was known to be very conservative. The impact of my mother's action was tremendous and widespread. The scandalized gossip throughout all the Indian princely states focused on the fact that an alliance between the two most important Maratha families was broken by the casual whim of a girl. Such a thing was not heard of. Indira then informed her parents that she wanted to marry the handsome Prince Jitendra Narayan of Cooch-Behar. Jit had much more in common with Indira. He was younger, he studied in England at Eton and Cambridge, and was also a part of British and European high society. He was over 6 foot, handsome, a talented musician, and he played professional polo and cricket. However, his family was viewed by other Indian royals as too anglicized. They were considered unorthodox and even, quote, wild. In the eyes of her parents, Jit was from a much less respectable lineage than Indira's former fiancé. His family also followed a completely different sect of Hinduism. Indira's family was strict Orthodox Hindus, and the final issue was that Jit was a younger brother in his family, so he would not normally inherit the throne. In August 1912, Princess Indira returned her engagement ring to her former fiancé. Despite her parents being totally opposed to Prince Jitendra, the couple kept their love affair ongoing for 2 years. One of the dreamiest parts of their love affair is that they wrote so many love letters to each other during this time. Indira even used her seamstress or modiste to try to send secret love letters to him. Indira was also becoming more impatient with her parents as time passed. In April 1913, Indira's parents summoned Prince Jitendra to their palace in Bombay, where he was told that he would never be allowed to marry her. Their royal romance had actually become common knowledge in India and Britain and was covered by the tabloids of the time, especially the Daily Mail in Britain. Readers on the morning of the 5th of May 1913 would have been shocked to discover that the wedding of Jitendra and Indira in Calcutta had been called off just 2 days before it was due to take place. It was later discovered that the Maharaja had changed his mind and that he would never consent to the match. But Indira had no intention of giving up so close. When asked by a reporter, she outright declared, "I have been engaged to Prince Jitendra for a long time and have always wanted to marry him, but at the last minute my parents refused to sanction my marriage." Indira's parents actually desperately wanted her to kind of forget him. They took her away to Europe in an attempt to have the romance cool off between them, and eventually she would just forget all about this, but it never happened because Jit followed Indira and her parents to parts of Europe. He booked rooms in the same hotels as them. In St. Moritz, Switzerland, the Baroda's family doctor, who had traveled with them from India, nervously said, "Here the Cooch-Behar family are at some place nearby. More than that, there are 2 men known to belong to that state staying in room 121 here." The following week, Miss Tottenham, Indira's English lady companion, was sitting with Indira in her room when a small box arrived for her, bearing on it the words, "The Princess of Baroda from room 121. It contained 2 sets of underclothes. Miss Tottenham was appalled. "My friends think I might need some more undies on my way to them from this hotel," Indira said calmly. This was the deciding incident. It was clear now. 18 months after Indira had broken off her engagement to Gwalior, she would marry no one but Jitendra. In August 1913 in Switzerland, Indira's parents changed their minds and gave her consent to travel to London to quietly get married. Their final decision was because of many factors actually. Indira and Jit's romance had captured the imagination of the British and Indian press. It was highly publicized at this point, and Indira was adamant that she would marry Jitendra. Her comments to the papers made that clear. Also, there were rumors that Indira was going to elope anyway. They didn't want to face an even greater scandal, so they withdrew their opposition, but they did not participate in the wedding. Not a single member of Indira's family was with her on the day of her wedding. She arrived 2 days after her parents had given consent to the marriage, wearing a close-fitting costume of blue with a large white Peter Pan collar. In honor of Indira, I'm wearing my very large white Peter Pan collar as well. Indira's parents sent their daughter off to get married from the home of a friend, Sir Mirza Ali Beg in London. One of his sons actually described the wedding in his autobiography. "I can well remember the sensation all this caused. Indira Devi, for to describe her beauty as ravishing would by no means be using an overworked cliche. Reporters flocked to our homes. Endless photographs were taken. The marriage was the big news of the season. Every illustrated paper gave it a full page treatment." Before the wedding took place, its legality had to be secure. An agreement was reached in which Indira's father made sure that she would receive some kind of stipend after her marriage. On the 25th of August 1913, Prince Jitendra and Princess Indira had 3 ceremonies in London as their wedding festivities. She wrote to both her parents before her wedding, hoping for a reconciliation in the future. Her father sent her well wishes, but there was no response from her mother, Maharani Indira Devi. The first event event took place that morning at the Buckingham Palace Hotel. This was Indira's initiation into the faith of the Cooch-Behar royal family, the Brahmo faith. The event took place with Maharani Indira Devi, her soon-to-be mother-in-law. Afterwards, Jit drew up outside in a motorcar filled with white lilies and chrysanthemums. Afterwards, a short civil ceremony happened at the Paddington Registry Office in London. This was covered the most by the press. The Daily Mail began its coverage of the wedding with the words, "The sun was shining with a brilliance almost worthy of an Indian summer." This photograph was published in the London press. It shows the couple leaving Paddington Registry. Dozens of photographers and 300 spectators waited outside for this couple. Prince Jitendra arrived in a dark grey lounge suit and a straw boater hat. He was followed by Indira, who was accompanied by her English companion, Miss Tottenham. Indira wore a fashionable rose Dubarry dress with a deep collar of white lace. Because of the extensive press around this drama that unfolded with their relationship and their love affair and now their marriage, there are many fans of this couple because of this extensive press that surrounded their love story in the British tabloids. And so they showed up for them at the civil ceremony. So their final event happened when they arrived back at the Buckingham Palace Hotel. The couple changed into their Indian clothing. Prayers were said for them and a reception happened thereafter. Indira wore a pink and gold sari for the remainder of the events, and Jitendra wore a slate blue achkan and turban. At the reception thereafter, the wedding cake was cut. This photograph was from the events of the day, and it appeared in many British newspapers as well. The couple honeymooned in Berkshire in England, but only 3 weeks later, their life would change. Jit's older brother had died, making him, as the eldest surviving son, the Maharaja of Cooch-Behar. Jit was a man unafraid of romantic gestures. For their 4-month anniversary, Jit gave his wife a tiny blue enamel airmail envelope engraved inside, August 25th to December 25th, love from Jit. Now in the possession of their granddaughter, it still contains a brown scrap of paper in Jit's penciled handwriting, "To the cutest little thing that breathed on God's earth. May there be many more of these monthly celebrations. All my love, J-Boy." Her nickname for him was J-Boy, and apparently he called her Babs. They seemed like such a in-love, sweet kind of couple. When Jit and Indira arrived in Cooch-Behar as the new Maharaja and Maharani in an open motorcar to the sound of conch shells, which is the traditional Bengali welcome for a bride, Baroda ended there and then for Indira. In October 1914, the couple had their first child. In total, Maharani Indira Devi of Cooch-Behar and her husband, the Maharaja of Cooch-Behar, had 5 children, 3 daughters and 2 sons. For Indira's 23rd birthday in 1915, Jit gave his wife a book of poetry dedicated to her. From the poems that he wrote to her in this book, we get a sense of their relationship being very fun, very lighthearted, and full of desire, as a newly married couple should be. The couple were married for 9 years, but Jit's health was deteriorating fast due to his battle with alcoholism. He died on the 20th of December 1922 in England on his 36th birthday. Indira was only 30 years old when she was widowed. So from the children's perspective, Maharani Gayatri Devi shared that Prince Jitendra died when she was way too young, but she says she does have memories of her mother after his death, quote, dressed in white, crying a lot and shutting herself in her cabin. By 1923, Indira had watched 2 of her brothers and her husband die from alcohol abuse. This probably informed the way that she led her life thereafter. When Jit died, she was more convinced than ever that happiness could not be found in one other person. Family was important. Friends were important. Lovers would be important. The most valuable lesson life had taught Indira was that she must be responsible for herself. After the death of her husband, her firstborn son was just 7 years old, and Indira would rule as regent until her son turned 18. It was not extraordinary to appoint a woman as a regent in Indian royal history. Historically, there have been many Indian royal women who have ruled or acted as regents, but Indira was really groomed to succeed in this role. Both her parents were leaders in their own right. She would have to define this role for herself to an extent because she rejected Parda, and this was unprecedented for her state. The palace was, of course, the center of government, and that is where she dealt with its administration. She also had to challenge the very nosy and critical and frankly annoying British officials who were very interested in the whereabouts and activities of the Maharani. Even when she was traveling away from Cooch-Behar, she did not want the British interfering with the administration of her state. Her letters to them from this time are strongly worded, and she challenged them constantly. Growing up as a princess of Baroda, she helped her father as he ruled the state, and this really gave her that confidence in her official duties as regent. With the administration, Indira had to handle the indirect pressure on Cooch-Behar to clear all debts. For that, she took various initiatives to wipe out state debt and cut down personal expenditure. Lord Lytton complained that Indira thought being regent was the same as being a, quote, ruling chief. She never lacked confidence or dignity in her dealings with the India Office, and among Indians was seen as a very able, energetic, and a benevolent ruler. Especially during the 1920s and 1930s, Indira was living this very independent life when the cultural and societal expectations for most Indian widows were quite stringent. Traditionally, widows broke their wedding bangles when their husbands died and never again wore ornaments of any kind. Culturally, remarriage was unthinkable, though the laws permitted it. Widowhood was especially hard for young women. Indira, so full of fire and fun, was not the kind of woman to retire from life altogether because her husband, however beloved, had died. The strength she had shown in choosing to marry Jit against all the pressures of her family and the society in which she had been raised had not been diminished by marriage. Indira was also known to be a great hostess, and she excelled at decorating and arranging the palaces and her homes. Her palaces had carpets, ornaments, and items from all over the world. Her personal bedroom at the Cooch-Behar Palace had an enormous leopard skin rug made by Schiaparelli from 14 leopard skins. Her bed in Calcutta was made from carved elephant tusks. She took an interest in the details of the palace, making sure that the beds were comfortable. Fresh flowers matched the decor. Towels were soft, and she made sure that every bed had a bedside light at the right angle so guests would be comfortable. Her parties were equally legendary. So I was actually reading about this quirk that she had. She made sure that notepads were fresh and unmarked. They called it blotting paper, but we would call it a notepad. And she was always worried that imprints of love letters might linger and others may read them. And I think that's such a funny quirk of hers because it's probably related to her experience when she was writing these secret love letters to her husband. The palace at Cooch-Behar had about 400 to 500 staff members, all answerable to Maharani Indira Devi. She proved that a woman, a widow at that, could entertain with confidence, charm, and flair without being in the protective shadow of a husband or father. A major characteristic in her lifestyle which makes her so interesting is that she spent a lot on luxurious things. The European hotels that she stayed at were always first-class hotels. Her shoes were works of art, mostly from Ferragamo in Italy. One pair of shoes made for her by Ferragamo was called Nymphia. It had a very interesting description stating that they shone at night. Also, like her mother, Maharani Chimnabai, she was a reckless gambler. The subject of her allowance was always a topic of ongoing back and forth between her and British officials. She traveled extensively during the 1920s and 1930s, and she was really a prominent figure in the elite social circles of London, Paris, and Hollywood. This was in contrast to her parents, who, despite enjoying their luxuries and comforts, they were mostly focused on duty to their subjects. Unlike other royals in her circle, though, Indira always made sure to pay her debts. As time passed in the 1920s and 1930s, Indira was rumored to have many lovers, and a friend recalled that she adored going to bed with very attractive men. In 1928, she adopted a friend's daughter, a child named Kamala, nicknamed Baby, who is described as being like the 6th Cooch-Behar child, even being mentioned in Maharani Gayatri Devi's memoir. In the book The House of Jaipur by John Zabriskie, it shared that baby was in fact Indira's child. Omitted from official family histories was the fact that baby was the biological daughter of Indira and Khusru Jung, a former cavalry lieutenant who became Indira's private secretary. Since it was never acknowledged officially or by the family, the nature of Indira and Khusru Jung's relationship is difficult to ascertain, but it continued in one form or another until he married a Parsi woman in 1941. The final separation between Indira and Khusru Jung probably occurred in the late 1930s. The rumors about her alleged love affairs reached their peak in the late 1920s. For the seasons in 1927 to 1928 and then 1928 to 1929, she rented a place in England in the Melton Mowbray neighborhood. This neighborhood was fox hunting country for the elite and the social playground for the British aristocracy and high society in the winter. It is rumored that Indira had a love affair with a mystery British aristocrat. The name Hugh Molyneux comes up often. He was considered to be very handsome and a ladies' man. But there's definitely more to this story, as an official letter from 1929 to her by the India Office informed her that the King of England, meaning George V, was greatly annoyed to hear the rumors about her conduct emanating from the Melton Mowbray neighborhood. Why the King was so annoyed with her was possibly because of the rampant rumors about her and his son, the Prince of Wales, having a little love affair. She may have set her sights higher, either the dissolute Duke of Kent or the raffish Prince of Wales. A great admirer of Indira's could have been the unidentified royal British lover because of whom her family say she was privately asked to leave England at this time, which would fit in with the factual account of the India Office's ambiguous message from the King. Although her daughter Maharani Gayatri Devi of Jaipur is more well known for her fashion, she credits her mother Indira Devi as having the better fashion sense. It was in fact Maharani Indira Devi who ordered chiffon fabric from France with the insight to create a chiffon sari that was later made popular by herself and her daughter. She was the real trendsetter of her time. Chiffon's racy association with lingerie delighted Indira. It was just unusual and daring for an Indian widow to wear colors and jewels, though she was careful not to wear certain colors, like red, which was considered inappropriate for widows. Indira made designers, both in the West and the East, alter clothing pieces for her so she would have something unique. And she allowed the shopkeepers to only make those patterns for their customers a year after she had worn them. In her late teens, Indira wore more Western clothing, mostly to annoy her more traditional mother. But as she took her place in the world, she became known as a very stylish and chic Indian woman, the most stylish and chic Indian woman of her generation. Before, saris were worn in different ways according to the region of the wearer, but it's interesting to note that Indira had her own way of wearing a sari, which is now more popular. Indira's method of tying a sari is today as standardized as it can get. The fabric is passed several times around the waist, beneath the right arm, crosses the body diagonally and hangs down the back over the left shoulder. This long trailing end is sometimes used Maharashtrian style to cover the head. So I can't talk about Indira Devi without speaking about her love of jewelry. She loved the rich colors of her Indian jewels, but preferred more modern European settings for the jewelry. She also followed the Hindu tradition of wearing certain colors on certain days of the week to worship each god and goddess. Indira was scrupulous about wearing clothes and jewels in specific colors on the days of the week dedicated to each different Hindu deity. On Mondays for Shiva, she wore yellow. On Tuesdays, coral for Hanuman. She was quite simply the most beautiful and exciting woman any of us had ever known. Even now, when I have traveled widely and have met many famous beauties from all levels of society, she remains in my memory as an unparalleled combination of wit, warmth, and exquisite looks. I loved reading Maharani Gayatri Devi's memoir, and she discusses her mother in her memoir, and it's clear that she was fascinated by Indira Devi, what she said, what she did, and what she wore. And we really get a sense of Maharani Indira Devi as a single parent and queen regent throughout her memoir. Gayatri Devi leaves out a lot in her memoir regarding Indira's love affairs and her more scandalous behavior in general. She adds that her grandmother, Maharani Chimnabai II, was very critical of Indira throughout their lives. And another thing that was very interesting about Indira was that her social activities did not stop because of her children. Ma's social life in London was very active. We had a house in South Audley Street and would often meet her in the entrance hall in the morning, coming home from a party just as we were leaving for school. I mean, she's kind of iconic for it. She's described as being a mother who would really change her mind about plans at the last minute. There was always something happening, which added a lot of excitement for these kids. There were nannies and a lot of helpers as well. Towards the end of her life, though, Indira seems to have been more critical and harsh towards some of her children, especially her son, who became the Maharaja of Cooch-behar. But I actually think that her frustration came more so from the change in royal status of Indian royals as independent India came to be. But in her old age, she hated being alone. She wanted to spend time with her family and her grandchildren. Maharani Indira Devi of Cooch-behar died in September 1968 after her health had been deteriorating for some time. At the time, she was living in Bombay and she was 76 years old. 2 of her children passed away during her lifetime. In her memoir, Maharani Gayatri Devi describes how she and her sister had to sort through their mother's belongings after her death. Every room in the flat was still filled with her presence. The flowers with which she had always surrounded herself were fading in the silver and crystal vases, and neither Minaka and I had the heart to throw them out or order fresh ones. We could easily imagine the room with Ma in it, the center of an endless stream of guests, filling the palace with her easy warmth and fun. The full-length, life-size portrait of Ma by Laszlo gazed dreamily down at us from the drawing room wall. There was the tiny, fragile young woman, her sky blue sari drawn over her head to frame that exquisite face with its huge eyes and its odd, half-sad mouth. That was Ma at the moment when the whole world seemed to be her domain, and when all the men were in love with her, and when she would, any minute now, smile her famous smile and make one of her unexpected remarks, outrageous or infinitely kind. She couldn't be dead. Before I end this video, which I absolutely loved researching for and making, I want to share a day in the life of Maharani Indira Devi when she was older. This was in the 1950s and 1960s. Her health was deteriorating a little bit, but we still get a sense of the diva and queen that she was. Indira usually woke late. She was always a night owl. When she was ill, she might stay in bed until lunch, writing letters and talking on the telephone. But she always kept up appearances. Even if she had a temperature of 102 degrees, she had her jewels on. She began a normal day with a large cup of tisane instead of breakfast. Then she had a bath. She loved baths, even taking a bathtub on the train with her, then did her puja. Dressing might take all morning. She was meticulous about every detail of her appearance. She did not wear much makeup, but she swore by Elizabeth Arden face cream. Before lunch, she had a gin martini. After lunch, Indira carefully prepared pan. In the afternoon, she went to the cinema or went shopping. Then she changed for dinner and had another martini. She smoked a few cigarettes a day in a long cigarette holder of gold or ivory. If there was anyone who I really would love to read their memoir, it would be Maharani Indira Devi. She was very educated. She led a really juicy, interesting life. Fortunately, she didn't write her memoir. We have research about her instead in a variety of books. I do hope that someday her many letters are published. She seems to have written quite a bit of letters and correspondence to people. But I think her story is fascinating because her glamorous and confident presence alone challenged these very rigid systems and societal norms of how a woman in her position ought to have behaved. For historical purposes, she's a very fascinating figure just by existing and by the choices that she made. And during her era, there were many limits to the rights of women, even royal women who were clearly born into a life of more privilege. Her role as a socialite and ruling as a regent bridged this gap between Europe and India, but this was always on her own terms, and that is what truly makes her a royal rebel.